On December 22nd, 2025, Chris Rea breathed his last at the age of 74, just days before Christmas. The news arrived quietly, yet sent shockwaves, at the very moment when driving home for Christmas was once again echoing through streets and cafes, returning to the top 40 like an enduring winter ritual across Europe. He passed away peacefully in hospital after a short illness, bringing to a close the journey of an artist who had spent his entire life writing music about one simple idea: bringing people home. To millions of listeners, Chris Rea was the voice of memory. To himself, it was the longest, most painful, and loneliest journey of all. On December 19, 2025, just 3 days before leaving the world, Chris Rea experienced a rare moment of clarity. There were no stage lights, no cameras, no audience. Only those closest to him sat by his hospital bed in the suffocating stillness of a winter ward. It was there that he finally said something he had never fully confessed to anyone for more than 2 decades. "I actually died in 2001. It was not a desperate statement, nor did it carry theatrical weight. His voice was calm, as if recounting a truth long accepted. For Chris Rea, the life or death surgery of 2001 was not merely a medical boundary between living and dying, but a full stop for his former self. The artist who once walked onto stage with strength, ambition, and the belief that his body would always keep pace with his music. He called the years that followed borrowed time, time on loan. A gift life had granted, but not without cost. Every morning brought pain, dependence on medication, injections, and the care of others. Life was no longer a given. It became a constant effort simply to endure. Chris Rea once said that the hardest part was not physical pain, but the feeling of living inside a body that no longer belonged to him. He still breathed, still thought, still composed, but deep down he knew he had crossed into another chapter of life, one where everything was far more fragile. When Chris Rea spoke of having lived in hell, many assumed he was referring to illness. But in rare reflections near the end of his life, he admitted that the greatest pain did not come from his body, but from the years he lost himself amid the glare of fame. To the public, Chris Rea was an international star, grand stages, platinum records, sold-out tours. Behind the scenes, however, he felt like a man imprisoned in a shape created by others. The music industry, where creativity should have been celebrated, became a rigid mold, forcing him to fit the image of a marketable pop star. Chris Rea never hid his love for the blues, raw, gravelly music that told stories of life, suffering, and redemption. Yet he was constantly pressured to write songs that were easier, brighter, better suited to charts and marketing strategies. He once said that every time he performed those commercial hits, he felt as though he were wearing a glossy but alien mask. Fame, rather than liberating him, became a straitjacket. It compressed his true emotions, silencing his authentic voice. Chris Rea recalled nights after performances when the audience was still cheering outside, while he sat alone in the dressing room asking himself, "Do they love my music, or only the image I've been forced to become?" That feeling stretched on year after year, quietly eroding his joy in making music. In the public eye, he was a symbol of success. Inside, he felt like a product on display, admired but never understood. That loneliness deepened as he realized that the more famous he became, the wider the gap grew between his true self and his stage persona. That contradiction gave rise to the hell Chris Rea spoke of. Not fire or darkness, but the prolonged agony of living against one's own nature. A silent pain, bloodless and undramatic, yet powerful enough to leave an artist's soul utterly exhausted. If his spiritual hell came from artificial glamour, his body faced an uncompromising fight for survival. In 2001, Chris Rea underwent the Whipple procedure, one of the most complex and brutal major surgeries in modern medicine. Doctors were forced to remove his pancreas, duodenum, gallbladder, and part of his stomach to give him a slim chance at survival. From that moment on, the idea of a normal life no longer existed for Chris Rea. He had to take more than 30 pills a day, inject insulin continuously to stay alive, follow a strict diet, and accept that his body would never be whole again. The pain did not arrive all at once. It smouldered, lingering, slowly wearing down both body and will. Yet that blow was still not the end. In 2016, Chris Rea suffered a stroke that left the left side of his body nearly paralyzed. For a guitarist, it was almost a death sentence. He had to start over from zero, relearning how to move each finger, how to hold the guitar, how to play the simplest chords, with the patience of a beginner. In 2017, during a performance in Oxford, Chris Rea suddenly collapsed on stage. The moment stunned the audience and forced him to face an undeniable truth. His body had reached its limit. From then on, he gradually withdrew from long tours, not because his passion had faded, but because he knew that every return to the stage was a gamble with his health. Even so, Chris Rea never complained or sought pity. He regarded each day he could still hold a guitar, still write a melody, however slowly and painfully, as a privilege. That quiet fight for survival, though unseen, forged the rare depth and authenticity that defined his music in the final years of his life. After years of being swept along by market pressures and the limits of his own body, Chris Rea slowly came to understand that he no longer had the strength or the desire to live up to any expectation except the truth within himself. And it was precisely in that moment, when he appeared most fragile, that he made the most powerful decision of his life: to reclaim the right to be himself through music. The Blue Guitars project was never created to please charts or the media. Those 11 CDs of pure blues were a late but uncompromising manifesto. No gloss, no concessions, no polishing to make the sound more accessible. Just a raspy guitar, unhurried rhythms, and stories told through the lived experience of a man who had traveled far down a road paved with pain. For Chris Rea, Blue Guitars was not merely music. It was a cleansing, an act of washing away years spent living against his own nature. It was a delayed reply to an industry that had once turned artists into commodities. He once said that every blues track in that project felt like a fragment of his soul being redeemed, slowly, painfully, but necessarily. In the final years of his life, when his health no longer allowed him to stand on large stages, Chris Rea continued to compose in silence. In October 2025, the Christmas album was released like a gentle farewell, not mournful, not loud. The album carried a warm, subdued tone, like a man sitting by a window, watching snowfall and smiling softly at the road he had already traveled. Music was no longer a career, it became a refuge. There was no longer a star to perform, no pressure to prove anything, only an artist nearing the end of his journey, using his final notes to say that, even if late, he had made it back to himself. Through all the upheaval, illness, and inner struggle, Chris Rea was never truly alone. His strongest anchor throughout his life was Joan, the woman who stood beside him for 57 years, from their youth, long before fame, money, or the storms of failing health. When the stage lights went out, it was Joan who preserved for Chris Rea a simple but vital truth: family is where you return. It is no coincidence that Driving Home for Christmas, the song most closely associated with his name, carries that very spirit. Written in 1978, when Chris Rea was still struggling, banned from driving and riding home in an old Mini driven by Joan through the cold winter, the song was born without glory or applause, just a road, falling snow, and the quiet relief of knowing that, at the end of the journey, a door would be open and waiting. That simplicity is precisely why the song has endured across generations. It is not about a glittering Christmas, but about the feeling of safety in returning to the people you love. And that may be the greatest message Chris Rea left behind. Success is not found in spotlight and applause, but in having somewhere to go when everything is over. On December 21st, 2025, just one day before his death, Chris Rea posted his final image: a snow-covered highway, accompanied by the words, "Driving home for a Christmas with 1,000 memories." No explanation, no display of emotion. Yet to many, it felt like the gentlest farewell possible. Chris Rea's passing, therefore, did not feel tragic. It felt like the last journey he had been preparing for all along, going home in the deepest sense of the word. A place with no pain, no medication, no glamorous pressures. Only the peace of an artist who had lived fully, loved fully, and was finally allowed to rest. In the end, Chris Rea's life resembled a slow, gravel-voiced blues track, imperfect, scarred, but profoundly honest. During 24 years of borrowed time, he did not run from pain or rewrite his past. He accepted it, faced the truth, and used music to tell his story of being human, raw, exhausted yet never false. When Chris Rea released the steering wheel for the last time, it was not a sorrowful ending, but the moment an artist was finally allowed to rest after a journey that had lasted too long. No more pressure to be a star. No more medication. No more physical limits. Only the quiet peace of someone who had learned to live truthfully at the end of the road. And perhaps that is why Chris Rea's story resonates so deeply. Because the question he leaves us with is not about fame or success, but something far more personal. After all the glory, after all the exhaustion, what are you really driving home to? If you've ever found a piece of yourself in Driving Home for Christmas or in Chris Rea's music, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more in-depth music stories. And you, if today were your final journey, where would you be driving home to?